that's when it caught my attention. I kind of, straightened up in my seat and looked out the window, and I saw this giant object, huge, coming down. It was like a 3-4 story building, and it was close enough that I could see structure and division on it. And it had lights, it had green lights, and it was pulsating with a green glow, like that. But I could see that it was because, I guess, it had all these green lights around it. And then it slowly came out. It was like right in front of us. I was confronted with its presence. And then it slowly came down until it was perpendicular to the car as we were driving straight on the highway. And out of the ground, I think what I saw was a giant black tube come out of the ground, and it was the same color as the desert night.
Aloha and welcome back to another show, guys. I have a wonderful guest today, Ali Siadatan. Ali is a true pioneer in exploring the fascinating connections between ancient civilizations, biblical narratives, and UFO phenomenon. His groundbreaking research and insights has opened up new ways of thinking about our history and the mysteries surrounding it. Before we dive into our conversation, I want to remind you to follow and support us. Your follows and reviews are incredibly important, and it helps us continue to bring you amazing content and guests like Ali and L.A. Marzulli, Ryan Peterson, Gary Wayne. They are all excited to join us because they see that there is an engaged audience out there. So by following and reviewing, you're helping us to grow our ohana and bring even more fascinating content and remarkable guests like Ali to the show. So without further ado, let's welcome Ali Siadatan to the show. Well, aloha, Ali. Welcome to the show. I am thrilled to have you here today. Your work has been incredibly influential, and truly you are a pioneer in exploring the connections between ancient civilization, Bible narratives, and UFO UAP phenomena. You're actually one of the first to bring these concepts together, and I think you actually really paved the way for a lot of people thinking this way with the Bible mysteries and surrounding it. Truly, I truly do think that. In fact, I first saw you and heard about you, I think it was on the Fourth Watch. Justin
wow.
Fall. Yeah, that was
Yes,
quite a while ago, like
it was.
2016 or something like that.
That's true.
Yes. So I'd like to, I guess, start our conversation. I'd love to hear your story about how you started to dive into this modern day UFO and Bible connection.
Yes. So the way that it started, different, with hindsight, I really do think it was God that orchestrated all the connections, because it naturally came together, one thing leading into another. I had come to understand my own spiritual awakening through Jesus and the receiving of the Spirit, and how this had to do with the temple, the interior temple. And this is explained in the New Testament. Sin is removed and the veil is removed, and your consciousness and God's Spirit, your spirit and God's Spirit mix. And so you become aware of the presence of God, which is what I was looking for. And this has kind of given me, I guess, a light through which I could see the meaning of things in the Bible. Because you really don't see things. You only see the reflection of light. That's how our eyes are designed. And I think that's how sight works, period. So even with spiritual matters, you only see them in the light of God. You don't see them. Without that, you kind of create a philosophical interpretation. So now I was ready for the larger story, the cosmic tale. And I walked into a study where the person asked us to read Ezekiel chapter 1, which talks about the wheels within the wheels, and it's the throne of God. It carries the presence of God. And the word vision implies in the Hebrew mind of that time something that is not clear, as though it's like something that's blurry and hidden, and then kind of it's like you see it through a glass darkly. You're not completely in the presence of God and seeing Him raw, but so this the throne of God, which is called the Merkeva, and there's a spiritual thing about that in mysticism and Kabbalah mysticism, and that's kind of not what I'm talking about. Even though one could say that you can pray and your spirit can ascend to the presence of God, but here the focus is on the physical transportation to the presence of God, like the chariots of Elijah. It's about the body can also go to the presence of God in the third heaven, because there's three heavens in the Bible. That's why the word is plural, heavens, shamaim. The first heaven is where the birds fly, the sky. The second heaven is where the stars, where the sun and the moon are, just outside of our planet, like the solar system area. And the third heaven is what we would call the universe. And there lies the temple at the heart of time and space, the presence of God. And so it's called the heavens. And when you read the word in the Bible, the translator has to make a decision for all of us, whether it's talking about the sky or the universe. So if it says the birds were flying, in mid-heaven, well, the person goes, okay, that's the sky, obviously. So he puts it, but that's what it is. I mean, the idea that heaven is a supernatural place in a ghostly dimension is an idea that really comes much later in European thought. But in the text, so the wheels of Ezekiel were presented to me, and we're reading it and we're drawing it, and it kind of, it really shook me that, wow, something carried. I understood that this is about God, but it does have a lot of very clear descriptions about lightning, metals, movement, wings that rise, wings that are put down. These are not flappy bird wings. These are more like, I don't want to say they're jet wings because I don't like to humanize them, but I could see that there's something going on here that involves process and sequence, like time and space, and will and intention and movement and carrying. And I didn't know that the word itself, Merkeva, comes from the same word as Rekev, which means to carry. So the difference between, basically, it's two words in the Bible. One of them kind of means the thing that carries you, Merkeva. It's like the carriage, like a carriage that carries a king with horses. That's the word here. And it says that God will return with his chariots in Isaiah 66, verse 15. And then there's the chariots of Elijah and other places that talk about the chariots of God, which is the word Rekev. But that word actually means also to carry. And it's the same. One is to carry, the other is the thing that carries you. But it's the same word. And so it's like, okay, well, this is interesting. And it really shook me. And I thought, what? And the gentleman said, there may be a connection between the UFO phenomenon and these biblical things. And I thought, wow, no one ever thought of introduced me to that idea. So I started to look into it, and really there wasn't a lot of things around other than the ancient astronaut theorists, they call themselves, like Eric von Däniken, who wrote the Chariots of the Gods, and Zacharias Sitchin was another important one, and he focused more on the gods. Eric von Däniken focused on these architectural things and that couldn't be explained, and he said, look, this was by ancient aliens. So but all of these guys were the ancient alien theorists, and that's not where my thinking was. I mean, not that I wasn't willing to entertain what they were saying. I'm a thinking person, but that was not my focus. My focus was, wait a second, like I was starting to rethink, or the concept of angels, and not so much rethink them. I didn't know at this point, but the church hasn't really thought about angels too much. It's just been more like an article of faith. Yes, there are angels. How did they get here? Well, We don't quite know. They have bird wings. They flap it. They come here. Even in Netflix movies, you see angels with bird wings, which goes back now, I know, to Roman art, where these carriers of the soul, when the Romans, when Christianity came from Israel into the Greco-Roman world, the early Christians were monotheists and they didn't sacrifice the god, so they had to kind of live in secret. And then when eventually they were allowed to come out in the open after the Edict of Tolerance of Constantine, then they started to now say, okay, well, let's put on the accoutrement of a real religion. We need like the setup. And there were people now coming to worship. There were people converting from, pantheism or the worship of the gods, let's say, to the worship of the one God of Israel. So they started to take from Roman art a lot of things, like the halo that was behind Apollo, the sun god, became the halo of Jesus's face. The Osiris and Iris and the whole Egyptian story of a virgin birth, that became the statue of Mary, and holding Jesus, and that's why it's the same. They just took it. The way that Zeus would sit on his ruling throne, that became the throne that Jesus was sitting on. And there was these tombs that the Romans had, and on these tombs were these things called the Nike, which were the carriers of the soul to the next world. And they were like little boys with bird wings. That's what you had on Roman tombs. And I guess the artist went, okay, that'll be the angels. And so they kind of took that in, and that started to become part of the symbolism of how these things would be depicted in art. But somehow not somehow, people didn't have access to the Bible for centuries, and it just became part of the imagination of people, and saying, okay, that's what an angel is. Not realizing how they're described in the text, that they're very different textually when you actually look at all the passages. So I was pondering these things when, the Spirit of God kept telling me to go to Iran and talk to my dad about a war that was going to happen in the Middle East that involved Iran and Israel and other nations, and that if this war were to happen, he should kind of not be in agreement with it in his heart and his conscience, even though he can't do anything about it, because God is against it, and it's an attack against the will of God. And Israel, is going to prevail in this war because of God's will for humanity. And so, as I kind of responded to this call of the Spirit, because it kept coming to my mind, and I thought it was a strange thought, so I assumed it must be from God because it wasn't like part of my natural menu of thoughts. So I went to Iran, and sharing this story led to the study of the Bible. Him and his wife were baptized. It led to other people being baptized. It was a supernatural trip of incredible magnitude. And in the middle of the trip, he decided, him and his wife said, let's go to Shiraz, which is a town that they're from, my whole family's from. It's about 11 hours drive south of the capital, and we were going to sleep in Isfahan, which is kind of in between. And so we were driving from that first leg of the road, and we were driving well after midnight because the roads are dangerous. And like when it comes to, no one follows the rules of driving. And so my dad prefers to drive really late at night. There's less traffic. So it was kind of empty highway at this point. We were well on our way in between the first leg of the journey, Tehran to Esfahan. And you would just see the odd car coming over, and the sky, the stars, that kind of a thing. It was like an Arizona type desert. Rocky, not sand dunes. And then I had my back to the driver's seat, the passenger seat, and my dad's wife was driving, and my dad was sitting in the middle of the back seat. And he had his hands over both of our seats, and he was listening, and I was talking, and I had my back to the passenger door, and right now we had engaged in this conversation about the Bible and had really captivated them. So I had only had 2 weeks, so it was like, tell us everything. So we were talking all day. They were listening to me. I'm talking like 8 hours a day just with lunch break, and we're just going through one topic after the other. The story of man, the story of Israel, the concept of the Messiah, and many the prophecies about the nations and empires and all kinds of things. And so suddenly my dad's wife points out the window in front of me, and she starts to make these sounds like. I'm so caught up in what I'm saying to them that I don't really pay attention. He then looks at her and he says, "What's wrong, Nima?" And then he looks in the same direction. Now they're both doing it, just pointing and making these sounds. So that's when it caught my attention. I kind of, straightened up in my seat and looked out the window, and I saw this giant object, huge, coming down. It was like a 3-4 story building, and it was close enough that I could see structure and division on it. And it had lights. It had green lights, and it was pulsating with a green glow like that. But I could see that it was because I guess it had all these green lights around it. And then it slowly came out. It was like right in front of us. I was confronted with its presence. And then it slowly came down until it was perpendicular to the car as we were driving straight on the highway. And out of the ground, I think what I saw was a giant black tube come out of the ground. And it was the same color as the desert night. If you weren't so close, you wouldn't have seen it. It was like camouflage. And then this thing came down, and the moment it was on, this was a sphere, and this thing was a tube. So they had a spherical entrance. The moment this thing was on top of it, it just went shoo, like that into the ground, like in a blink of an eye, and disappeared. And then my dad's wife, she yelled out, "This is a sign from God to tell us that everything that Ali is saying is true." Like about Jesus and the Bible and all of that. So, and then like, "Did you see that?" I'm like, I just sat like, in my chair. And then the next morning at breakfast, we didn't talk about it. I was looking at both of them. But I realized shortly after, and I started to really look into it, that this was an experience that people had. It was overwhelming. You didn't know what to do with the information. It's outside of your body of knowledge and thought, and you literally don't know what to do with this piece of information. And you're just going, okay, I'm going to leave it right here. But when I came back, and eventually my life, natural events in my life led me to make this documentary that people can watch on thinkagainproductions.com. I had called my dad to see how he was doing, and then he asked me what I was up to. And I said, "Oh, I'm making this documentary about UFOs." He didn't say anything. And I thought, I said, "Do you remember?" And then he just blurted out, "That green thing on the road to Isfahan." I said, "Yes." So that's when I realized, he had seen a green thing as well. And so that was really the only conversation we had. I mean, I explained to them my idea that this was in fact related. And then, when I started to make the documentary, obviously, you now had to express the idea to others. So you had to dot your I's and, bar your T's. So I had to take a deep dive into the concepts from a biblical point of view, which is what interested me. The ancient alien theorists were placing their thinking in the Darwinian paradigm. The idea that it was mythology or just natural phenomenon in our age, well, that didn't hold water for me anymore because now I'd seen one. And so the idea that perhaps these ancient texts had something to say, and the difference between the Bible and the other ancient texts, like the Vedic texts, and that talk about the Vimanas, which is the term in modern Hindi for aeroplane, because there's some very detailed descriptions of these things in the Vedic text. The problem with these other texts is that it's not a problem, but they just present the gods as objects of worship, and they say this is the way of righteousness according to them, like Islam. And in some of the ancient religions, especially, there's also sometimes sacrifices accompanying the worship, and psalms sung to them, like the Vedic text, for instance. The second of the Vedic texts is dedicated entirely to the psalms that should be sung during sacrifice. So The thing with the Bible was that it actually tells a story. It's not just telling you believe in this is how you worship God and this is the righteous way of living and then you're going to go to heaven. It actually tells a story that is based on in history with real places that we have archaeologically dug out or we know exist, like Jerusalem, Rome. You know, we don't have to really dig them up. We've never lost sight of them. Athens, etc. But it tells a story of people and of these beings that are over the nations. The God that speaks the words of the Bible into existence presents himself above all the levels of authority, including the beings that are over the nations and Israel. And then the story involves a real nation, Israel, which is on the news every day, and the empires, which we know of, like the Egyptians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and it tells a story, the history of Earth before it actually occurs, the history of the world, and it presents it in the light of the thinking of God, the author of the Bible. So as you kind of follow the breadcrumbs of that story, and say, okay, what if these beings, what if these chariots are actually identified by this text correctly? This is who they are. Then actually all of history falls into place. It all aligns, and it leads you to a 21st century. The narrative, the story, as you follow it, it leads you into the world in which we exist, and it continues to inform us as to why they appear so strongly in our time and where it's all going. And so that was very compelling because it was the only puzzle, the only thinking structure, like the Bible, in this that actually brought all the pieces together, and it fell naturally into place, like the facts of history, the elements of reality, and the way the narrative put them together are actually the way things unfolded, and continue to unfold. So I felt that this was the most compelling lens through which to see this. And so I thought, okay, this story has to be told, especially since the modern day phenomenon and the empirical evidence that researchers are collecting matches even the prophetic lens of what would come on the stage of history at this time concerning this phenomenon of the angelic. So I thought, okay, wow, even that falls into place. Not only the past, but even the unknowable future. So I thought, okay, this story needs to be told. This is a more accurate lens than the ancient astronauts. It's a more accurate lens than the myth, the people who think the ancient stuff was myth and the modern stuff is natural phenomenon. There are too many holes in their thinking. And then, of course, some people may just see it in the sense of spirits, but they do have substance, or ascended masters, or things like that. But they have actually substance, both in the text and in reality. And what they do requires process and action. So it gave me a new perspective on the world of angels as a whole. So that's kind of was like the beginning of the research.
Yeah, that is amazing story. I can't even imagine seeing something like that in person. A couple of stories high, you said, and building
Yes.
structures you saw. That is incredible. And how
Yes.
big was it wide? Like a football field or something?
Yes. Yes. Like a football field. It was huge. And
Oh
I
my
was looking at it
gosh.
like this, as I was coming. And yeah, like a football field, 3-4 stories high, spherical. I could see levels of separation and green lights all around it.
Did it make any kind of noise?
No, perfectly silent.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That is, and that other cylinder thing that you said that came out
Yes.
too from under the ground?
Yes, it came out from the underground. So we're on the highway, and then maybe a few hundred feet perpendicular to my because I was just following it as it was coming down. Actually, I wasn't looking at the cylinder; I was looking at it. And as it was coming down, I realized, oh, what's this? And then it just boom, we were now perpendicular to the cylinder, and it came out of the ground, and this thing went on, right on top of it and went like that in the ground. And there are people who've made documentaries about stuff that comes out of the ground, and the Jacques Vallée, who was one of the earlier ufologists from France, he worked in the Paris. He was an astronomer. And he worked in the Paris. What do you call it? Where they observatory. Where they the Paris Observatory, and they actually told him that everyone is seeing these things, and send it to the Americans. That's where it's all going to be looked into. But then he decided that, hey, this shouldn't be ignored every time they saw, and that he took it upon himself to become a researcher, and he was kind of one of the earlier researchers. He had a cameo in Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He appears in the movie actually playing himself, Jacques Vallée. He went to the Amazon because there was all these people who were saying they have sightings. And he said that when he went there, what they were saying, there was these rivers deep in the Amazon, and this stuff was coming out of the river, and the people living around there were seeing it. So this idea that they come out of the ground and go into the ground, and the bases in the ground, there are other people that are documenting this, and if they have been here for a long time, then it makes sense. That they have to exist somewhere, out of sight. So the Earth, yeah, I guess so. But yeah,
it's like the story, like Tim Alberino. He said he went to the Amazon and the face peeler.
Yes.
Kind of like that, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, the face peelers. The so this was written in the 1980s by Jacques Vallée. He said that when he got to the Amazon, he had to take a car to as far as the road. He had to fly. Then he said they drove for 12 hours. And then he said he got into a canoe, and then they had to go from there to get to this village that was having these sightings. And he said they were called chipas. That's what they called them, CHIPAS. And they were small, white, very shiny, bright, cube-like things. And sometimes the hunters would be sitting in a tree, perched, waiting to hunt. And then these things would arrive, and then they would jump down, and they would run through the forest, and these things would chase them. And he said that he talked to a woman. And she said that her husband came home after one of these encounters, and he was sitting, and his skin started to fall off. All of his skin started to fall off, and they were about face peelers. And he said, so he died of the pain, and she said no, he died of the fear. There was no pain. It was so, scary what was happening. He died of the fear, which sounds very demonic. And it sounds like something that would really hate humanity. I mean, you look at all of these strange spirits that have brought about giant modalities of world governance that have killed millions of people. I mean, look at Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Joseph Stalin, Hitler. I mean, if there is a spirit behind these things that's dark and evil and real, then killing humanity is not something they object to. They have a deep hatred of humanity. But again, none of this makes sense unless you plug it into the story of the biblical narrative from the beginning. And some people like me will have to look into the archaeology and how the text is put together. You have to come to believe it, this is really work, this is true. And then when you realize, wow, it all adds up, then the story you can receive it, and it's like everything makes sense because the world order is explained from scratch. You see how things took shape, who everybody
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, definitely. So, do you think Nephilims and angels, all that is connected to this UFO sightings that we see?
Yes. In the modern day UFO sightings, Dr. David Jacobs, before him was Bud Hopkins. He wrote a book where he popularized the word hybrids. He's the creator of that word, Bud Hopkins, I think in 1983. And these guys, Dr. Jacobs from Temple University, Bud Hopkins, John Mack from Harvard, head of psychiatry, he wrote a book in 1994 called Abductions. These guys documented through the accounts of thousands of people who had they were totally normal people, like police officers, judges, teachers, housewives, janitors, like people who are just like completely normal and have important jobs that we respect and value their judgment, and who would have nothing to gain by creating crazy stories. They tell the story of being abducted, which is close encounters of the fourth kind. And because all of the UFO sightings, they fall within categories. Everyone's falls in a category, and those categories were created by Dr. J. Allen Hynek. In his book UFOs: A Scientific Inquiry, he was the head of Project Blue Book for 20 years, 1947-67, an official office of the Air Force where you could call and say I had a sighting. And he was an astronomer, worked for the Air Force, and then he would fly out on the Air Force's dime and have a look at it, and then decide whether it was natural or not. And people, all kinds of people sent pictures to him, even like ambassadors of nations sent him pictures of stuff they had taken with their cameras. And because it's before digital wizardry, it's very interesting. So he created all the classifications, including the close encounters of the first, second, and third kind that Spielberg used as the title of his movie. And then there was the fourth kind, which was this idea of abductions. And Dr. Jacobs was really the first person, and John Mack from Harvard, to go. So Jacobs from Temple University, John Mack from Harvard, and they went into it. And what they discovered was that the accounts of abductions always led to the creation of hybrids. And you can see that in my documentary because I've documented it well in the second half. And modern day hybrids, modern day hybrids, I'm adding the word modern because that then brought the hybrids in the Bible to life for me. The way that the chariots, the modern day UFO phenomenon brought the chariots of angels, like it says in Psalm, I think it's 68, verse 17, that God comes to Sinai, and there's God, and with his chariots. And the word is and with his chariots. And the word is Elohim, which can also translate as angels. So they're there with their chariots. And so thousands upon thousands, it says. Now the idea of hybrids, because the Bible talks about Nephilim, that the sons of God had children with the daughters of men, and that this created a race of giants. And this is documented throughout the ages, not only by the Bible, but by the writings and carvings of virtually every civilization that had written record and even oral tradition, like the natives of America. So now that I was like, wow, if this is happening today among us, so they're hybrids today, then there must have been. It's true. These guys in the past were dealing with the reality of these hybrids the way that we're dealing I mean, they are in our religious texts, they are in our engravings, they are in our written texts, and they're in our oral traditions, like even the island of Malta. So, so basically, it brought it to life for me. The modern day UFO phenomenon and the empirical evidence of the creation of hybrids, and tons of people email me and say, oh, you know what, I'm an abductee, I've seen the hybrids, do you want to talk to me? I usually don't, because it's um, this is not something that should be happening. This is not a good thing. This is a negative thing. It's the perversion of the introducing of fallen angels and their shenanigans into the DNA of those who are the children of the one that was made in the image of God, and they want to imprint us with their own image and create creatures that are made in their own image. So in that sense, the modern day hybrid phenomena connected to the UFOs and the ancient Nephilim phenomenon connected to the sons of God means that it's the same guys that our ancestors talked about continuing into modern history. The reason we sometimes call them UFOs or hybrids or aliens is because we are in a scientific paradigm in our civilization, and we tend to see everything through that lens. So it's an unidentified flying objects, and we're now in like the Darwinian age. Like we believed in the heavens and on the earth, and then there's the host of the heavens and the host of the earth, that's us, and the chariots that are in the Bible. But then starting, Lord Bacon, who was a Mason, he wrote the New Atlantis, but he was also an important scientist. Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, these guys come and tell us, no. You know what? We're not really in the heavens and on the earth. We're in the universe. And we go, well, what's the universe? They go, well, we'll tell you. Let's look at it through the Galileo's telescope, and as we document it, we'll tell you what it is. There's rocks, there's gases, there's dwarfs and solar systems and black holes, and we're like, okay. And then Darwin comes and he gives us he gives especially the atheist a myth, creation myth, and then these things that have been here from ancient times, that have been well documented in all of these other texts as objects of worship, but the Bible then provides deeper insight into their identity, that the nations were given into the hands of the gods, and the fallen angels posed as objects of worship in the pantheons of the world. And then, God chose Jacob, and so now we see that our history is, and there's the download of information, that all the civilizations have received their codes from the gods. And so our civilizations were born from the codes of information downloaded, whether it's the Quran or the Bible, or Jesus comes from heaven and speaks on earth and his words rewrite their own empire, or whether it's the Code of Hammurabi from the sun god Shams. And it goes on and on. All the civilizations attribute their genesis to this downloads, but there's two sides, two contentious sides. One is the side of God, the other is these other beings. So the Bible is the only book that provides this extra layer of insight into the identity and formation, and then puts them in a story and tells the story before it happens. And when you follow it, it leads us to the world as we know it. So it becomes very compelling that, wow, this book's got it right then. And things continue to go forward. So this has been a continuous presence. And so the Nephilim of old may be called the hybrids of today because of our, language, our scientific age, and the angels fallen and righteous, the Elohim they're called in the Bible, of yesterday can be called the UFOs of today, because we now have rethought reality from the point of view of Galileo's telescope and the materialism of David Hume and the science of these guys and Darwin's theories about how is it that life appears, conscious life appears. And so we've extended that into the universe and made assumptions about reality. And now we think, oh wow, the aliens have arrived because we're thinking about it through that lens, that construct. And then we are even saying our ancestors saw them. Oh, they're ancient aliens. So we've created like a story, a fairy tale, and omitted the document that is like a lens of light explaining the true nature of reality and the consistency of it from generation to generation. The world hasn't changed. We are literally living in the same world as our ancestors, seeing the same things, and operating in the same bodies of knowledge that are the foundation of civilization, architecture, writing, religion, kingship and governance, military arts, medicine. All of these bodies of knowledge that appeared in the south of Mesopotamia and formed the first civilization are the bodies of knowledge that we are operating in. So we're living in the same world, we have the same passions, the same emotions, the same questions, and we're seeing the same things. So there's nothing new under the sun. It's a continuation of the same phenomenon. The only thing that has changed is our language, is the way we're choosing to explain it. And so I'm reclaiming the biblical and ancient lens as being more, having more value, relevance, and insight than the modern lens born of just the assumptions of a few people who just imagine reality for all of us. Like, for instance, there was... so do you... I was going to give an example, but perhaps you have a question you might want to ask.
No, I want to. No, I want to hear your example.
Okay.
Before my
so
question.
when archaeologists went to the south of Iraq and they found the oldest cities there, they were surprised at how advanced the oldest cities were. They thought, oh, the cities in the north, Assyria and Babylon, they were going to be more advanced. And as they went south, maybe they would find the rudiments of civilization. But actually, they found cities that were even more advanced in the south, that the south was the fountainhead, the knowledge base from where the northern cities had received civilization. And that was called the Sumerian civilization, the land of Shinar in the Bible, which is where Noah and his son settled and built with brick and mortar, which is what we see. We see brick and mortar, bitumen. They would take the tar that was just floating to the surface of the Middle East. And that oil trade that went all the way into the Roman Empire. The Mesopotamians were trading oil with the Romans, and then they still do it today. So they were like shocked. They were like, where did these guys get this information from of architecture and pillars and temples and religion and writing and everything? So they looked into their libraries, and we could read it. And for the sake of time, there's how it takes too long for me to tell you how we could read it, but we were able to read it well. And what we discovered was that they were saying that all this knowledge was downloaded. They received it as gifts. 4 cities, 4 towns in South Mesopotamia, and they gave the list of the bodies of knowledge they received. In Sumerian, it's called Me, M-E. In Western Semitic, it's called Parshu, which that's kind of Abraham's language. So in Hebrew, it's Parsha. It means division. So maybe it was when the world was divided into nations. Each nation was given different gifts or different bodies of knowledge. Maybe they took not only languages that were different, but they took different bodies of knowledge that stayed in their minds. I don't know that the Chinese came up with some bodies of knowledge that humanity can benefit from. The West came up with some bodies of knowledge that humanity can benefit from. So regardless, these bodies of knowledge were handed down that formed the basis of civilization, including the religious laws, which were the foundation and center of all the bodies of knowledge that organized the ancient human societies around these priest kings, because before that humans were organized around family clans and patriarchies, like the house of Jacob and his sons and wives and all that. But suddenly in the south of Mesopotamia, we see a shift, and people get organized around priest kings. And that's what we call urbanization. That's what anthropologists actually call urbanization. The first cities of the world appear, but what they really are groups of population that are organizing around a priest king that serves a god, and like the Pharaoh of Egypt is the most famous of the priest kings to us looking back. But they received these bodies of knowledge, and different towns in the South Mesopotamia received different bodies of knowledge. And that's how civilization came to be. Not only religious law, but even in the Bible, we see that Moses is shown, we're told, mainly heavenly things and told to create earthly replicas. And that's how the temple is built. And the architecture is given of the tent of meeting. And then later the architecture is given for the temple. And by God, the measurements are given. And that's what we see in these ancient Mesopotamian texts as well. And from, for instance, the knowledge of temple building, the math is so advanced that you can draw from it and build smaller things. So you learn about your knowledge of architecture increases. So we had certain base abilities, like even Cain built a city, we are told, so he understood architecture and geometry. But then they're like, wow, so we're supposed to understand that these ancient civilizations came from knowledge handed by the gods, the Eloni. That's how civilization started. I mean, it does sound like a lot like the Bible, like not only codes of religion, but then this guy, and I was just looking at this book I have, the National Geographic here, and it's The Birth of Religion, the World's First Temple. This is from 2011. So there was this discovery made in Turkey, which called Gebile Tepe. And Gebile Tepe threw a wrench into some of the theories that these guys were operating in that I'm about to share with you of how civilization started. Because it's very ancient. It predates farming, but it already has architecture. But hovering over Gebile Tepe is the ghost of Gordon Childe, an Australian transplant to Britain. Childe was a flamboyant man, a passionate Marxist who wore +4s and bow ties and larded his public addresses with noodle-headed paeans to Stalinism. He was also one of the most influential archaeologists of the past century. A great synthesist, Childe wove together his colleagues' disconnected facts into an overarching intellectual scheme. The most famous of these rose in the 1920s when he invented the concept of the Neolithic Revolution. In today's terms, Childe's views could be summed up like this. Homo sapiens burst onto the scene about 200,000 years ago. For most of the millennia that followed, the species changed remarkably little, with humans living as small bands of wandering foragers. Then came the Neolithic Revolution, a radical change, Childe said, fraught with revolutionary consequences for the whole species. In a lightning bolt of inspiration, one part of humankind turned its back on foraging and embraced agriculture. The adoption of farming, Childe argued, brought with it further transformation. To tend their fields, people had to stop wandering and move into permanent villages where they developed new tools and created pottery. The Neolithic Revolution, in his view, was an explosively important event, the greatest in human history after the mastery of fire. So just this guy, who was actually in his 20s, imagined for all of us that thousands of years ago, he said, forget all of this writing that these guys have left in their libraries about how, they were created, how they received these bodies of complex knowledge that kick-started suddenly civilization, because that the archaeologists noticed there was no rudimentary steps. Even the oldest towns already were very advanced and had pillars and temples. That's why they call it sudden civilization. He said, forget that. This is what happened. These guys were running after their food, but some of them had a moment of brilliance, a coup de génie, and they came up with farming. And now they could sit around and think and talk. They weren't running after their food. And they had necessity, but they had each other. And suddenly they came up with all of this. They came up with architecture, and they came up with astronomy. But the stuff, the astronomy and the math was very advanced. Like, they were measuring the distance between planets and looking into theoretical, trigonometry. And so, but he was an atheist. He was a Stalinist, and he couldn't believe that there was anything else, handing any information out to anybody. And so even though all of the sacred scriptures, the Bible, and even these other books claim this kind of transmission of knowledge, and these books are very advanced and very complex once you get into them, and then the library after library of people who lived it and who were obviously were smart enough to create the basis of the world in which we are still operating in, and who are just like us, I imagine. We're their genetic kind of mirrors and duplicates, and so he puts all of that aside. He puts all of this written record from all the collective human race and the sacred texts. He puts all that aside, Gordon Child, and he imagines for all of us a theory of his own mind while he's in his 20s, that it was through the end of foraging and the beginning of villages that humans had time to think and talk, and they came up with this stuff. And so then the Marxists will say, oh, they then wrote it in this idea of revelation and religion because they want to dominate. It's the opium of the people. Again, there's no evidence for that. People who are high and low in the hierarchy of life worship God by just because they feel like it. And people have questions about the mysteries of life, and people are touched by God and by other things. And they receive revelation, and they have insight, and they see things of their own accord. No one is forcing them. They're not like, it's not like a few smart people are running the world and everybody's just dumb and, oh yes, thank you. Um, and then there's the Darwinian idea that, oh, we lived in the forests and we came out and evolved, and now we remembered those scary things that haunted us in those days, and we created these stories to protect us and comfort us from our primer fears. And all of these are just, or the Jungian concept of the collective subconscious. These are just ideas of pushing aside the very evidence that the honest account of our ancestors that have handed down to us in the millions from all over the planet, what it actually happened, and they repeated over and over, this is what happened. So for me, the fact that these beings are here and they're communicating with people and giving them knowledge and insight about what's going to come and how they should behave, this really said, okay, well, it seems that nothing has changed. And so people like Gordon Child, their ideas taught in the university system, and entire generations are raised believing it, that this is the birth of civilization was essentially the result of the Neolithic Revolution, which is something that he invented. There's no evidence for it, essentially. But the evidence is in the writings, the evidence is in the fact that God provides cultivable seeds. And that's one thing, they can't explain, the genetic botanists, they're like, they can't see like the massive leap between the wild variety of wheat and barley and the variety that can actually be cultivated in such a short amount of time. They're like, this can't go from here to here in such a short amount of time. But after the flood, God provides seeds. So even the goddess Diana provided the seed for the olive. So there's even the idea that seeds were given, seeds of knowledge were given, life was planted on the earth, then the life was planted with knowledge, and all the civilizations attribute their genesis to the codes that have been. This is actual facts, and the Bible's history and prophecies add up, and archaeology supports it. Facts. Gordon Child imagines, based on his atheist Marxist ideology, in his 20s, the Neolithic Revolution that forms the imagination of people who've gone to university. So this is an example of how reality can be weaved. With the UFO phenomenon, it existed until 1967, when Project Blue Book was closed. The research of Dr. Hynek was given to Professor Condon from Colorado University, and I think in 1971 he printed saying it was all just fake. There's nothing to see here, folks. And even there's a memo we have he sent to everybody saying, I'm going to say that, don't worry, because his colleagues were like, why did you take this kooky research about UFOs? You're going to kind of make us look bad. And he said, don't worry, I'm going to dismiss all of it. And that becomes the official stance of the government. Then, so suddenly, if you were kind of an adult between 47 and 67, everyone was talking about it. Air Force people were being interviewed on television, high level army people, Life magazine was writing about it. It was politically correct to accept the UFOs. Everyone was seeing it. After 1971, the official media and government take the stance that there's nothing to see here, folks. So suddenly it's awkward. You're like crazy if you still maintain that, oh no, I think I'm seeing something. So the research goes underground until about 2020, where there's an article that appears in the New York Times saying that, hey, the Senate is actually, putting money aside for this. And there's a whole department that's looking into it. And then suddenly we see a re-emergence of interest, official interest. And so people who are looking into it for the first time, they're thinking, wow, the government is finally realizing it, not realizing that there was a golden age of 20 years of it. Then it went underground. Now it's coming back up. But it's interesting how the official view of reality handed down by the institutions form how we see things. And especially if it's authoritative, like a university, a professor, a PhD. But the truth is that the facts are this, that these things are not new. The story of hybrids are not new. And not only they're not new, but they've been part of what has shaped the history of humanity. We're not living in a world they're visiting. We're living in a world that is born of the codes of civilization that they've handed down, the influence, the choosing of kings, the creation of government, the creation of civilization codes, the handing down of religion, the infusion into our DNA of themselves. And we're all together in a story. And what is that story? Well, the story that the Bible tells, because we are the children of Adam and Eve, and we're in a giant story in the heavens and the earth with God and his angels. We're of that world. We are beings of that world. And that's why our history bears evidence of the interaction between us and them, forming the world order, forming civilization, and leading us all the way to the 21st century. And that's why we continue to see them with us. And they've appeared now, I think, because history is about to change gears and go into a new season. And so the timing of their mass reappearance in 1947-48, is connected to the birth of the State of Israel, which prophetically tells of the birth pang years, they're called. The years that lead. So there's this thing called the end times. It's when Peter, he's a fisherman from Galilee, Shimon, and he gets up at the temple in Jerusalem when apparently the Spirit of God appears, which of course I believe that. And then under the influence of that Spirit, he really opens up what we call the Old Testament and reasons from it, supernaturally seeing things that even highly educated people weren't seeing, and he correctly kind of deciphers it. And he says in that speech that we have entered into the end times, which is one of the ages of history, because all the ancient people, like the Mayan calendar, but also the Hebrew Bible, divided history in ages. And this was one of the ages of history. It was the age of history that heralded the end of the imperial rule of empires, like the Roman Empire, the Babylonians, and all, and ushered in this utopia called the Messianic Kingdom. That's how history was divided. And so he said that has started. We are now in the end times, and we are in the final phases. The transition has started. And so for 2,000 years, we've been in that transition as the Spirit goes to the nations and people let go of the worship of these idols, these fallen angels, these gods. And everyone, people pledge allegiance to the King of Kings, and the Word of God is distributed. I mean, it's a whole thing. Israel is blinded partially, spiritually, and scattered among the nations, but then suddenly called back. and the story starts to, in a way, go back to the way it was 2,000 years ago. The Persian Empire is rising again, and the Jews are back in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, and many of them are proclaiming Jesus the Messiah and preaching the gospel like they did 2,000 years ago. The West is kind of starting to form a unity. We'll see once Russia and Ukraine are resolved, how is it that Moscow will fit in this, but it's as though the Roman Empire is re-emerging as well. And so we've gone 360 degrees, but regardless, the point is that the very last section of this period of history, called the end times, is called the birth pang years, meaning that now, like a woman who goes into labor, the birth pangs have started, where one age of history gives birth to the next age. And there are convulsions, and the tempo increases as we get closer to the moment of birth. And so these beings appear like a sign in the heavens when Israel becomes a nation, which was prophetically that we are to understand the moment that the birth pang years begin. And it's centered around Jerusalem. From there, it echoes into the rest of the world. And so here we're seeing that these beings appear and they begin to present themselves not as gods, like they did to our ancestors, but as modern day gods or aliens, UFOs. And now that we see the official government talking about it more readily again, I think they're preparing people for the fact that, hey, they're here. And there is information I've noticed, because I've been a researcher of this for a long time, and I follow the patterns on the internet. I see, oh, look, that idea, I saw that like 6 years ago, and then I saw it like become louder 2 years ago, and now it's like very loud. I see there was like 4 or 5 ideas in the deep of the internet, but this one really suddenly came to the top. So right now, the idea that they're here to help us, which is the idea that was given at the very beginning. In 1947, 48 already, government was being advised that they're here to help us. They're here to help us through the nuclear age. We don't blow ourselves up. There was a movie that came out in 1951, or is it 52? But 51, 52, called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And it's about an alien that comes to the Earth, and at the very end, he gives a message. He lifts his finger up, and all technology stops for 1 minute all over the Earth to show how powerful he is, and then he delivers a message. And the message is, in order to join the galactic community, you have to put away your warlike ways, put away your nuclear weapons and all that stuff. And so from the very beginning, even before any research was done into this whole phenomenon, so that we could actually find facts and us to understand, like, what is really going on, like the idea that they're secretly creating hybrids and all kinds of... Already, there was a messaging. There was a seeding of ideas at the genesis and dawn of the appearing of this phenomenon. Because their idea is to present themselves as the pseudo-saviors to the human race. They are, the Jesus is not the savior. We are the saviors. And now what I'm seeing is that one of the ideas that's deeper in the internet, in the world of these things, is that there are 2 sides, multiple sides, good aliens and bad aliens. And I suspect that is going to come more and more to the surface. They're going to start saying, oh, you know what? Yes, there are 2 sides. We are the good guys. But the one that's coming with his armies, with his heavenly armies, they are the bad guys. And now that I see that the biblical text doesn't describe angels the way that Netflix movies do with their bird-like wings, or the Renaissance painters took from Roman art, it is... I see that the text of the Bible, what it describes, and all these ancient writings about the gods and about the angels in the Bible and all that, they sound more like the UFO phenomenon. They look more like the... So I see that the second coming may look more something that these guys they're preparing in their new paradigm, in the scientific paradigm, that they may have inspired this through the secret societies. For centuries, they have rewritten our understanding of reality in the scientific age, and now they've invented themselves into it as aliens, and more precisely as the saviors of the earth, because that's the messaging from the very beginning of the UFO phenomenon, at a time where no research was done. And that's what most people believe that are interested in UFOs, that the saviors of the earth have arrived. We have all these problems, and the governments are holding it back from us, you know? And so the soft disclosure of the government slowly kind of, telling people that, hey, they're here. They don't want to create a revolution. They don't want to say, yes, they're here. And everyone's like, well, then forget you. Why would I pay my taxes or follow the laws? There's now a bigger power. Let's see what they want. So, but I think this idea is going to come to surface more and more, that there's more than one side. And we are the good guys. But these guys gave you religion. They want to rule you. They hate you. They will project their own intentions on the Savior. And that will now lead us to the war of wars, because the Bible does say that the nations go to war against the second coming of Jesus. And you think, well, how's that even possible? Because you'd have to be insane. To not believe is one thing. To reject, to rebel, to have doubts, fine. But to actually go to war once, God and his angels appear in the sky, well, that's kind of silly. It's crazy. Unless you've been deceived to the point where you don't see them as that. And you have been armed. I mean, right now, you look at the Nazis, which had some force behind them. They got this huge revelation about armament. I mean, they came up with like the rockets, the V-2 rockets, bombers, stealth planes, things that the Americans took and built up. And so did the Russians. And that's how the Soviet and American world were able to take this German technology. But where did they get it from? Why were they so advanced? What revelation was pouring into their consciousness? There was the whole occult movement at the end of the 19th century led to the rise of the Nazis. It was decided at the Nuremberg trials to suppress that because they were afraid that they would plead insanity. It would give them a chance to plead insanity. But the writings are all there. And these guys then needed a guide to manifest their religion into the world. And that's what Führer means, the Führer. It means the guide. And so they anointed him as the person to bring that in. And so that information reminds me of the days of Noah, because Jesus said it would be like the days of Noah when asked about the end of the age. And the days of Noah were the days like the book of Enoch and the book of Genesis explain, where the sons of God came, but they didn't just create children, they gave knowledge that corrupted the earth and chose kings. And that's what we're going to see, that these guys are going to choose a king, they're going to give knowledge, and they're going to set up the armies to actually put up a fight with this angelic, technology, to try to match the technology. And so so this massive leap of knowledge that we've had since the birth of the Industrial Revolution, and now, Carl Schwab is telling us that we're about to go into the fourth industrial age, the digital revolution, and the age of cyborg, where Elon Musk puts the telepathy in our brains, and we connect to AI and quantum mechanics, quantum computing, and all of the stuff, which is hard to even imagine, but they say AI is going to change the world even more than the internet did. So we are accelerating our ability, and I think these guys have not only appeared, not only are they beginning to present themselves to us as the saviors of the world, but they're also inspiring and giving technology that is getting us ready for the war of angels that's ahead of us. So suddenly the entire idea that God and these heavenly armies appear, and these guys have come at this time when the birth pang years have started, where this age of history gives birth to the next, to meet him in battle and prepares for it, now became very real. And yes, they're flooding the world with hybrids, just like they did in the days of Noah. and throughout the ages after the flood as well. So this world is going to get more intense, and I think this knowledge is being revealed to us and by God, meaning that these hidden aspects of the Bible are being opened up because we need this information to understand the world in which we're being plunged in, to navigate through it, to deal with it, and to make proper decisions and to be comforted. Because, the Lord sits on the throne and the good guys win. And, He's got the whole world in his hands. So it's not like chaos and darkness, but it is a time of deception and evil rising. And yet the light is shining all the brighter. So it's,
Wow. That is crazy. That is crazy, but you're right. Everything that you said, it makes so much sense. Oh my gosh. And isn't that your new, I think you're making a new documentary
yes.
on Goliath Rising, hybrids, Nephilims, and the Titans?
Yes, I am. Actually, I'm working on a book right now. And that is going to be my priority. My book will be out this fall, and it's called The Three Princes, and it's going to kind of bring to life a whole new part of this angelic reality that's mentioned in the Bible. And it's going to be very interesting, I think, at least to me it is. It's going to also deal with the rise of forces that have come over the world since October 7th, the war that started in the Middle East. So, we talked about the Nazis, but there are other forces. The Marxism is a religion, so is Islamism. And then there's a story the Bible tells. The birth pangs are coming to a new place, and there is a lot of these ideas are uniting to fight the narrative structure. The story that the Bible tells is not just a story; it's a revelation for God's intentions concerning human history, concerning real people, and where God is taking humanity. And there's a plan to stop that. And so I'm going to show that plan. And I'm going to show how it's happening and who's behind it and why. Of course, not only are we told that, but we're also told that it won't work. The very thing that they want to do in order to stop us is the very thing that will actually propel us forward. So it gives hope, because this story is going to accelerate. What we're seeing right now has started in the past year. It's just the beginning of it. I think that by the middle of the 2020s, we will find ourselves in a very large war in the Middle East, something we haven't seen since World War II. And so it's good to understand that don't want to get too far ahead. So in this book, I'm going to lay the foundational thinking of how to look at it, and then as the events kind of form and accelerate, then I will add to it. There'll be the other books but now we'll have a context. We'll have an understanding of how to see it, and then as it kind of goes in that direction, we can now put in more details. But to help people out. But it is connected to the world of these things. Once you understand the UFO phenomenon is the manifestation of powers and principalities of angels, of the Elohim, then the relationship they have with empire and history, and the relationship that God has with it, and the Spirit of God and angels, real angels, and us, it's very complex and multi-layered, and it involves all the aspects of reality, like the cycles of the economy, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the movement of history, and especially the very tense events of the birth pang years.
Ooh, I can't wait.
Okay.
I'd like to have you back for that.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yes, I know you have to go. It's past your time.
Yes.
But I want to thank you so much for joining us today on this show. I really appreciate your insights, your time that you shared with us. It's been truly enlightening, and we deeply appreciate your expertise on this connection between ancient civilization, Bible narrative and the UFO phenomenon. I really, really appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
And
People can watch the documentary at thinkagainproductions.com. It's called UFOs, Angels, and God. And if you double click on it, it'll take you to my YouTube channel where there are more videos and can subscribe to that. I'm creating new videos for the channel.
yay, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Mia.
I
Thank you for
appreciate it.
having me.
No, thank you. And that brings us to an end of another episode. A huge thank you to Ali Siadatan for sharing his insights on ancient civilizations, biblical narratives, and UFO phenomenon with us today. And listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow the podcast, leave a 5-star rating, and write a positive review. Your support means the world to us, and it's the only way people will find us. When you subscribe and leave reviews, it helps us to reach more listeners and attract more guests, amazing guests like L.A. Marzulli, Ryan Peterson, Gary Wayne, and even Ali Siadatan. They are excited to join us because they see that they are engaging audiences out there. So by following and reviewing, you're not only helping us to grow our ohana, but you also help to bring more fascinating content and remarkable guests to the show. So until the next time, remember, in the world of UAPs, the truth is out there, just waiting to be revealed. Ahui ho kako. Bye.